All right, this is a tutorial for installing Visual Studio Code on your computer and compiling your own Marlin firmware for your Creality Ender series printers. This tutorial is largely based off of the tutorial from Teaching Tech Video on YouTube. However, there are changes in the latest version of Marlin that doesn't seem to be completely reflective of the video. So these are up to date as of Marlin build version 2.0.9.3. When today is February 25th, 2022. So the first step you're going to do is you're going to make sure you're going to download Visual Studio Code. So you're going to go Google VS Code, and if you do that, you can download Windows version. I think I already have it installed. Okay, so it's finished. I'm going to open the software and it's gonna okay, so it's finished, and when you open the software, it looks kind of like this. What you're gonna do is you're gonna install a couple of extensions. You should see this bar on the left side. If you don't see it, you can always go to View, go to Appearance, and go to Show Activity Bar. First thing you're gonna do is go to this square blocks called Extensions, and you click on that, and then you're going to search for platform.io. So the one with the little bug's head, click on install. Okay, and once that's installed, you're gonna also download auto build Marlin. Okay, so it's auto build space Marlin, and it'll take you to this and install this one as well. And you'll notice that there's an M logo, that's the auto build Marlin, and then the bug head is the platform.io. All right, so now that's done, you can close your extensions. And now you're going to go download the Marlin software firmware itself. So you're going to go here and go to Google, and you're going to search for Marlin firmware. It'll take you to marlinfw.org. If you go here, you can go to download Marlin latest. This is the latest version. So you're going to download two files from here. You're going to download the latest release, and under the download, you see the 2.0.x zip. So you're going to click on that. You're going to download this, and I'm going to keep this on a new folder from there. And I'm going to rename this 2.0.9.3. Download that. The second file you need is the configurations, which are preset templates for specific printers. You'll go over here to the configurations. And when you click on that, you have the files here. You can download individually, or just go to this code, pull it down, and go to download zip. That should download the configurations. So I'm going to download that as well. Okay. Now that that's downloaded, you're going to open up the folder where it resides, and then unzip. Come on. You're going to unzip the Marlin. And again, I get a little confused because sometimes I try to do the nightly builds, which is not entirely recommended because they are buggy. So what I like to do is just create a new folder. Again, you can just keep at 2.0.x if you want to. That's going to take a while, so I'm going to let that cook in the background while I go look at the configurations. So configurations are files that are located here. You don't have to unzip the whole thing. They used to come packed inside the firmware, but now that's been separated since a couple of releases ago. So if you go in here, for us, we really only need the one for Creality, right? So if you go to config, and go to examples, and then in here, you'll see Creality. So open that up. And then here you'll see Ender, and there is Ender 3 Pro, but we're going to go with Ender 3 V2. So this is an example where you've taken an Ender 3 Pro, maybe upgraded the motherboard. You don't have to, or the new ones come with 4.2.2 motherboards. But this is considering that you have the 32-bit 4.2.2 or 4.2.7 silent motherboard. And you've added to it the Ender 3 V2 color display. So if you did that, you'd essentially be running off of the 3 V2. If you had the original Ender 3 Pro with the monochrome LCD, you'd be using that file right there. But I'm going to go ahead and open this. And then there are a couple of files in here. So a couple of files. One is this dwin_set. This is a firmware for the LCD display. The LCD the color LCD that you purchase is not going to work with the firmware. It's designed to work with the firmware that's already on the original Ender 3 V2. So you're going to have to change that. So what you do is you would actually copy this entire folder, the dwin_set, to a 8 GB micro SD or smaller, formatted to FAT32. You would just drop this folder into the root directory of the micro SD card. And then when you unscrew the 4 screws at the back of the LCD, and then if you grab it by the metal prongs and just try to pull on it gently or harshly, it'll pop off and you'll see a micro SD card slot on the PC board. You would insert the card, and then you don't have to put the back on. With the card inserted, you're going to reconnect it to the computer, not the computer, the printer, and turn the printer on. The screen should turn blue, and then after a few seconds, it should turn orange. And when it turns orange, that means the firmware has been copied onto the display. At that point, you're going to disconnect or turn off the printer and then disconnect the LCD and remove the micro SD card. And then you could, at this point, put the back on the LCD and screw it back in. As far as the firmware itself, we're going to go to this one that says Creality V422. Now, this is for the 4.2.2 board. So if you had the Ender 3 Pro and you did not upgrade the motherboard and you're using the 4.2.2 that's on the board, there's nothing to change. So in here, there is Marlin UI and Creality UI. The Creality UI is the UI that the Ender 3 V2 ship with. So there are 2 files that are here called configuration.h and configuration_advanced.h. These 2 files are templated to work with the Ender 3 V2s. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy both of these. And then I'm going to go up back. Okay, so go here, and then if you go to the Marlin folder, that is the folder where the firmware was unzipped. And if you go in here, you'll see a folder called config. You don't have to drop it here. Essentially, in the end, what you do is you can drop it in a folder called Marlin. So if you open up the Marlin, you'll see configuration.h and configuration.advanced.h. So you're going to paste the two files in here. It's going to ask you to replace, and you're going to replace both. All right. At this point, we're done. And what we could do is we can open up VS Code. So I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to open up folder. And then I'm going to point this to the folder that is the parent folder of the folder that has the Marlin. So when I do that, VS Code will open up. Yes, I trust the authors. You like to configure the project? I guess so. Always configure? No. Okay. Now, a couple of things. Now you're in this screen, and now we can modify your firmware and then try to compile it. So the first thing we're going to do is that if you go to here, automatically it should open up platformio.ini. Hold on. Sure. Okay, so it's going to open up a file called platformio.ini. If you don't see that, it's located here. And if you notice, this is the Marlin 2.0.9.3 folder, which is the parent folder of the Marlin that I opened up. Right? So in it is platformio.ini. It should already be opened. One of the things you're going to change here is you're going to change the default environment from Mega 2560, and you're going to call it STM32 F10 RET 6 underscore valid. STM32F, nope, that's 10. 103. Yeah, I screwed that up. 103 RET. I'm just going to cut and paste it here just to make sure that it's done properly. So you're going to do that. I'll put that in the descriptions or in the documentation. All right, so once that's done, we're done with the platform IO.ini. So at this point, you're going to open up two files. So you're going to go to the Marlin folder over here, drop that down, and we're going to double click on configuration.h to open that up, and configuration_advanced.h. All right, so go to configuration.h, and there are a couple of things that you want to change. So the first thing you want to do is as you scroll through here, you might want to change the author. It doesn't really matter. It's not that it shows up anywhere, but you can change that. All right. So the first thing you're going to look for, you can do Control F on your screen, and that should bring up a search box, and you can actually search for the stuff that I'm typing in. So one of the first things you're going to search for is motherboard. So over here, it says define motherboard Creality _V4. This is the 4.2.2 board. So if you're using a board that's 4.2.2, you don't have to change anything else. But if you are using the 4.2.7 board, you do have to change the motherboard because the way the stepper drivers are addressed is different. And if you've got the wrong board version here, your stepper motors are not going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out by putting 2 slashes, and then I'm going to change this to board _ Creality, and it's going to say V427. So that's going to make sure that it's going to use the 427 stepper driver addresses, so then the drivers themselves actually work. Okay, so now we're going to scroll through, change a couple of other things. There's the printer name is here. If you change that, the name of the printer on the top of your LCD screen will also change. I sometimes put in the maximum bit size, but I'm not going to address the bit size in this firmware. I'm just going to leave everything the stock. So it's going to be the 220 by 220 millimeter bit size. So what's the first thing we're going to address here? We're going to address the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Control F, and we're going to search for dwin underscore Creality. And then once you, and then escape, and then now we're in the controller area. And if you see that, then you'll notice that it says dwin Creality LCD. This is the V2 LCD. That's part of it. What I like to do is comment this out and actually turn on the enhanced display. That gives you a little bit more menu settings. It's called, like an expert setting. So we can do that. And then the other thing you want to do is at this point, technically, if you were to compile it, it should work. It may not. You might get an error, but that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to compile this. So this is strictly if you're just swapping out with an LCD to the new board, and this is a new firmware, right? So now what you're going to do is to compile this, you're going to go down here to that check mark, and if you click on that, it should start the compilation. And then what it's going to do is it's going to open up it's going to open up a folder called .pio for platformio. So this is, I'm doing this on a Google Drive mirrored folder. That's why you see the updates. But if I double click on platformio folder and then go to the build, you'll notice that there's a folder that matches the motherboard type. If you double click on that, currently it's empty. The reason is because it's going to start compiling, and as it does, it's going to start putting in some files. So I'm gonna probably either cut away or fast forward if I know how to do that. And I'll see you back when it's done compiling. Okay, so this is a great example of what happened, where even though the file is set for Ender 3 V2, it failed. And if you go back here and if you scroll up, it'll tell you what the mistakes are. A lot of people freak out when this happens and then they don't know what to do. So if you go here, it's kind of self-explanatory. It says here, fan underscore soft PWM is required, enable it to continue. So what I'm going to do is just highlight this, highlight that, okay, and then hit Control C, copy this, and then click up here in configuration.h, and this actually could be closed at this point. And now I'm going to do Control F, and then find fence of PWM, and then there it is. So if I hit escape, you notice that here it's not turned on. So I didn't turn that on purpose so that we would have this error. So when you get an error by reading through it, you can find what part you're supposed to turn on or if there's a conflict. So I'm going to uncomment this to activate it. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and click on the checkbox again. Sometimes though, when it builds this, and if you happen to have the .pio folder open, sometimes it likes to flush it out. And if you do this, if you're in here, Windows won't let the Visual Studio Code flush or delete the folder, and then you'll get an error message. The error message doesn't mean anything, it'll still compile. But what I like to do is just go over here, come out of the .pio folder, and then go back here and press the compile again. And then it's going to execute the compile the second time around. The compiler is working. I'm going to go peek back into the PIO folder, into the build here. Then when the firmware is compiled without an error, you will get the firmware file in this folder. It'll be a file name .bin. As this is compiling, one of the things I wanted to mention is the file name of the .bin file must be different than the file name that was used to install the firmware on the printer. Meaning, if you call it firmware.bin, and if you put it on the card and you put it into the printer will update it. But then if you compile a new firmware, and if you also call it firmware.bin, if you put it in, the printer will not update. It has to be called firmware1.bin or anything else. That's why when Visual Studio Code compiles this, the firmware name from the auto build Marlin is going to have the date and time stamp so that the name of the firmware would be different enough so that the printer will accept the new firmware. You can name it whatever you want, as long as you understand that you can't have identical name on a new version firmware. If you're going to update the printer, the firmware.bin, the name must be different every time you install it. Now, you can have two different names and go back and forth between A and B. But like I said, it's a lot of people don't understand that. And there are people who complain that their firmware they cannot update the firmware. And that's probably where the problem lies. Okay, so if you got to here, it's a good news. If you have this firmware dash 2022-02225 .elf, that's good news because when it's linking this .elf file, that means that at this point, you're probably not going to have an error. And that means that you are going to get a firmware. Like I said, if you look at this, you'll see the date and then dash, and this is the timestamp for the file. So that if you were to compile the firmware twice in the same day, the two bin files will actually differ in their file name. And this is so that the printer will accept the firmware update. Okay, so the firmware time date stamp says it started at 2:12:59 seconds. It is now 2:21. So it took a whole 9 minutes for this to build. The first time I did this, I thought my computer had crashed, but it isn't. You'll see on the lower corner down here when it's compiling, you'll see a spinning arrow that says building. as you can see, it says that it was a successful compile, and then now you'll see this bin file that's located here, and that is the firmware. All you have to do is copy this to a micro SD card that's 8 gigs or smaller. I use a 4 gig, and you just have to drop it into the root folder of the SD card, pop it into the printer, turn it on, and then what you'll notice is that it'll just sit there with the screen black for about 5-6 seconds, and then it'll load, and it will start the printer normally. And then once it's done, that is the new firmware. You can take out the card, turn off the printer, and take out the card. On playing with this, I realized you can use the micro SD that the printer came with, where you keep your G codes and your print files, because if it sees a firmware name and if it's already installed, it's just going to ignore it the next time. So I don't think you really need a dedicated micro SD card. I didn't check to see if it will work if there are other files on the card, such as the print files, but that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so this is done, but what I want to also show you at this point is, now I'm going to close this, show you how to change things up if you have other options, such as, let's say you've gotten yourself a BL Touch. By the way, even without the BL Touch, something like this, it's actually got baby stepping disabled. So you want to actually turn that on. So let me actually show you that first. So what you want to do is, in this case, if you were to run this firmware, it would be as vanilla as it can be. So the next step is to start activating some of the features. So for the baby stepping, I want to go to configuration_advanced.h. And what I want to do is I'm going to do Control F and search for baby step. And then if you look here, baby stepping has been turned on. So it does have it turned on. So if you're using the Ender 3 with the monochrome display, this would allow baby stepping. But for some, I don't know if it's an oversight, the baby stepping is not available if you leave it compiled like this. And this was frustrating a lot of people, but no one seems to actually have an answer. I posted on Reddit and nobody actually got back to me until I figured it out. So what you do have to do here is that you gotta turn on some of the other features as well. So what you want to do is turn on the one that says baby step without homing. And then the most important here is the baby step always available. Turn that one on by uncommenting it. And then the other thing is this. If you do 1, it's going to be too small of an increment when you try to turn the knob. So I changed this to something around 40. And then I think this alone would be enough to make the printer work. There's another part here, Z probe offset, baby step. Z probe offset. I don't see it. Let me search for it. Okay, so this is if you had the BL Touch installed, you would be turning that on. So I'm not going to do that right now because this part of the video is only about turning on advanced features without the BL Touch. Speaking of advanced features, the other thing you want to turn on is look for advanced pause. So this is turned off by default, advanced pause feature. So by not having this turn on, this means that if you go to Cura and manually insert pause or filament change, it will just ignore it and just continue printing. So what you want to do is here, if you uncomment this, now your printer supports advanced pause feature, which means that you could actually put in pauses in mid-print. So you can try to change the filament color. So you want to turn that one as well. At this point, we are done with turning on the basic advanced features. You can go back to configuration.h. Some of the things I want to point out here is if you go all the way to the beginning and come down here to the part that says Ender 3v2. You can, again, you can change the name of this and it'll change the name of the printer on top of the LCD screen. The other thing that I wanted to point out is right here, define custom version file. This one allows you to put in some more information. So if you go to the info part of the menu of the printer, it'll get the information from this version.h file. So if I turn that on, that means that it's going to look for the version.h. So for that, I go over here on the left, and then you see this version.h. If I double click it, it'll open up the version.h file. So now if you look at this, almost everything is completely commented out. So essentially, when it reads the version.h, it's not going to get any information out of this. So what you can do is here, start turning on some of the features. This is version 2093. And then there's a distribution date. You want to probably change that. So today's date, I'm going to change that to today's date, like so. And then the name, I don't think it actually gets it from anywhere, but you can keep this as the same name as you had in configuration.h. So whatever you named it here, you can call it Bob, but you can keep it the same over here. And then a couple of other things. The website URL on the Creality version, that seems to get read, because not all of this shows up in the information. So you can create, you can put information here, something like built by me on 02/25/22, so that from the printer, I would know what the build date of the firmware is, right? So that's not a bad idea to do. Or you can actually put the firmware build version if you're going to start putting build numbers on your firmware. Okay, so this is going, if you were to compile this by hitting this check button, I'm not going to do that because it's going to take another 10 minutes for it to compile. It'll create a new .bin file right under here, and you'll notice it'll be the same file name, except the last numerical value is going to be more updated to the current time. And then if you load that onto a flash, onto a micro SD card and then put it into the printer, it'll actually make it print. Not print, I mean update the firmware. Okay, so you got yourself BL Touch and you want to turn that on. So how do we do that? So for that, you're going to go search for the BL Touch. So I'm going to do Control F and put in BL Touch, and then you'll notice it says define BL Touch, and it's been commented. So to activate BL Touch, you're going to uncomment that, and that should turn on BL Touch. There are a couple of things that you do need to do though. You're going to look for this one. The old Ender 3 Pros didn't have a BL Touch port, so they had to use a Z-axis limit switch port. So for the Ender 3 Pros, you would have to turn this on, but you don't want to turn it on if you have a V2 with the, well, I'm sorry, if you have the newer motherboard, the 32-bit boards. So you want to make sure this is commented out and don't turn it on. If you look at other tutorials and they tell you to turn it on, that's for the old 8-bit motherboard, so you don't want to do that. All right, a couple of other things that you want to do. So you want to use Z probe. Look for use Z probe. I'm sorry, use underscore probe, right? For homing, there it is. So search for use probe for that one. And then what that does, that if you have BL Touch installed, you would be removing your Z limit switch. So therefore, you're going to turn that on so that when it actually homes the Z, it's going to use the BL Touch auto bed leveling sensor. The other thing is search for bilinear, right? And then if you scroll down here, you'll see this right here. So you're gonna turn on auto bed leveling bilinear. This is the different types of algorithm that it uses to probe the bed. I haven't tried any of the other ones, but this one seems to be most popular. And then finally, the other thing is Z_safe homing. And you want to turn that one as well. And what that does is that tries to prevent your BL Touch probe from getting mashed. So that's a good thing to turn on. Okay, so at this point, if you followed everything and made all the changes, then by compiling the software, you should have the color LCD from V2 operating. You would also have BL Touch enabled, and you would see a BL Touch in the menu of the printer. And then you would also have your printer support advanced pause. And this is probably where you want to leave it at. Well, actually, one more thing that I forgot to do is this. You want to make sure you go to probe to. Okay, so if you go probe 2, scroll down. Don't see it. Try to look for it. Oh, there it is. Nozzle to probe offset. So you want to try to search for this. And what this is the BL Touch probe location in relation to the actual nozzle on an XYZ coordinate. So you want to go here and you want to change that. So you can actually measure this with a ruler, or what I do is that I take a piece of paper, put a dot on it, slide it on the bed, lower manually until the probe is at the dot, and then lower even more until the nozzle crashes onto the paper. And when I lift, I can do a XY measurement from that. From my experience, this is -40, which means that the probe itself is 40 millimeters to the left of the nozzle, and it also is -6.5, or the probe is 6.5 millimeters to the front of the nozzle. You can put a Z offset here, but I like to put it leave it at 0 and just fix that later within the printer by using the Z offset function. So you want to probably put this in, because if you don't do that, your probing is not going to be as accurate. So at this point, it's completely done, and you should have BL Touch activated with your color LCD.